Sony Computer Entertainment officially announced the groundbreaking PlayStation 3 at the Electronic Entertainment Expo of 2005.
Some of you who are regulars of my channel may know that I made a video recently where I went over 25 recommended games for RPCS3. This will be the second video in the series, and once again I will add another 25 games to look out for. So with that out of the way, let's start with the arbitrary list.
Stop right here.
While it was specifically aimed at online co-op gameplay, Army of Two had a competent single-player campaign as well, allowing the player to give orders to his AI teammate, and this made it possible to do complex tasks together. Army of Two has some of the best third-person mechanics that you'll ever find in a video game, so it comes highly recommended for anybody who's looking for a decent tactical shooter. It should also be noted that the series has never been released on PC. Drakengard 3 was developed by the same studio that would later go on to make Nier Automata. It's a prequel to the first Drakengard and features similar combat. You can even perform aerial attacks using a dragon, and this can be achieved through on-rail sequences or free roam sections, where the main character is free to dismount the dragon at any time. What many people don't realize is that Drakengard plays off in the same universe as Nier Replicant and Nier Automata.
Welcome to Russia.
MI6 has given us the go-ahead on the mission.
Let's wait until the last truck passes. I'll take the car on the left, you take the one on the right.
GoldenEye 007 Reloaded is a remake of the original game from 1997. It has altered and more detailed level design, plus the protagonist is no longer Pierce Brosnan, having been replaced by Daniel Craig. It was first released on the Nintendo Wii, before getting a re-release on Xbox 360 and PS3 a year later. In order to take advantage of the better hardware, this new version was built on an entirely new engine. It also included special ops missions and compatibility with the PlayStation Move controller, although it's not mandatory.
Step right up.
Double Dragon Neon is a 2012 reboot of the series. It has similar gameplay to the original games, but with enhanced graphics and improved controls. For example, the player now has an evade button, which can further improve combat when use of this new function is timed well. The player character will gleam red and do more damage against enemies. Double Dragon Neon was not made by Technos Japan. Instead, it was handed over to an American studio, but the original creator did oversee its development.
It may have been some kind of omen.
You're being paranoid.
I'm being cautious. If something's waiting for us, it's best to be prepared.
You worry too much.
Legendary designer Brian Fargo helped to produce Hunted: The Demon's Forge. The game's story is actually based on his very first game back in 1981 and plays off in the same world. It's a lot like Gears of War, where the player character hides behind walls to shoot enemies with a bow instead of a gun. In terms of emulation, everything was reasonably fast and stable. Since my comparison a few months back, RPCS3 has certainly improved a lot, so there shouldn't be crashes or freezes anymore.
Round one. Fight.
Dark Resurrection is an updated version of Tekken 5 and was released for arcades, as well as the PSP and PS3. It has more characters than the base game, plus more customization. The home version includes a mode known as Devil Within, a variant of Tekken Force introduced in Tekken 3. Fighting games have a good track record on RPCS3 because they're relatively easy to emulate. And Tekken 5 is no exception, performing without a hitch. Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed is the fourth installment in the Sega All-Stars series. It's a kart racing game in which players race against each other using over 20 characters from various Sega franchises, such as Sonic the Hedgehog, Jet Set Radio, and Space Channel 5. At certain points in a race, vehicles can alternate between car, boat, and plane modes. It's not quite as good as Mario Kart, but on PlayStation there wasn't much competition, so the game is highly recommended for fans of arcade racing games.
Never heard of a total communications blackout on one of these things. You'd think with 1,000 people on board someone would pick up the phone.
Dead Space was heavily influenced by movies like Event Horizon and Solaris. But when it comes to gameplay and atmosphere, the creators drew inspiration from Resident Evil 4, which at the time was still the gold standard for third-person shooters. The Dead Space series was one of the last creative endeavors by Electronic Arts, before the company decided to abandon story-driven games in favor of live services. Currently, a remake is in the works and destined for release in 2023. Mirror's Edge features hundreds of first-person animations to convey the character's movement and interactions within the environment. The idea is to gain momentum via parkour and outrun enemies, or to disarm them through hand-to-hand combat. The game runs on a custom version of Unreal Engine 3 and has a very unique art style. The trial and error gameplay can get a little bit annoying after a while, and you really should only play this with a controller. However, once you understand the mechanics, there's a lot of fun to be had. In 2005, the original Geometry Wars was a massive hit on Xbox Live, and PlayStation owners had to wait a full 9 years before Geometry Wars Dimensions finally landed on PSN. The wait was worth it, because Dimensions was the best one yet, and it got even better when the game got a free update, called Dimensions Evolved. It featured 40 new levels, new gameplay modes, and more boss battles. This is perhaps the best casual twin-stick shooter of all time. Valkyria Chronicles is similar to XCOM in that it utilizes turn-based combat. I think the episodic style of the game's progression, the needlessly long tutorial, and perhaps the pencil graphics were off-putting to people because it didn't sell very well on PS3. And that's a real pity, because this is one of Sega's best ever games. The story is basically an alternate history World War II epic, and the gameplay does pick up nicely after the tutorial section, so if you're looking for something different, try Valkyria Chronicles. Serious Sam 3 is a great game if you don't mind waiting to unlock all the weapons, because you'll be relying on the sledgehammer and pistol for a long time. Early levels are also sparse, but once the action kicks in, you'll feel right at home as you shoot unrelenting waves of enemies. I like the earlier games more, but Serious Sam 3 is still great fun. In my opinion, you should play it for its expansion packs, which ultimately are better than the base game.
Mind you, who would after what she went through? She saw her whole family slaughtered in front of her very eyes. Now she's just another mouth to feed for the village.
Fist of the North Star, Ken's Rage, is a 3D beat-em-up for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and was spun off from the Dynasty Warriors games. It's alright, but the gameplay can become very repetitive after a while. I'd say the characters will keep you invested though, because Fist of the North Star is like a really good manga series. Still, I don't think Western gamers will appreciate it as much. It's just too Japanese for its own good. Skate 3 is a skateboarding game set in an open sandbox, called Port Carverton. At the time of its release, there wasn't much competition from the Tony Hawk series, which had generally fallen out of favor. Skate offered a slightly more realistic take on the extreme sport, and this helped to keep it popular on 7th-gen consoles. The ragdoll physics are exaggerated and can sometimes be exploited to perform hilarious tricks. Overall, it's a really good experience, as long as you know what you're doing.
Get down! Oh, shit! Lynch! Right from the right!
Kane and Lynch 2 is a third-person shooter which looks like it's being recorded on a shaky camcorder. I don't know how else to describe the visual style, but it helps to make the game feel gritty and hyper-real. The leading protagonist isn't a very likable character though, and his companion is even worse in many ways. It's hard to relate to either of them, but the gunplay is really good, and the city of Shanghai feels very believable as well. The last MotoGP game I played was MotoGP 08, and the 2014 rendition is a lot harder to get into, not because it's a bad game, but because the handling is more unforgiving. It helps to know the tracks, but what you really need is precise control. The slightest mistake will send you into the gravel. All in all though, this should satisfy fans of MotoGP, and it's really fast too, so speed junkies will love it. Thieves in Time wasn't developed by Sucker Punch, but Sanzara Games. It was also the last game in the series, despite ending on a cliffhanger. What I like about it is how it still looks like a proper Sly Cooper game, despite the obvious graphical enhancements. Levels are also far bigger than ever before, and contain much more detail. But it's the story that's the standout here, perhaps bettering even the first game's redemption arc.
The papers in my briefcase.
That's you, bro.
As one of the early PS3 games, Hitman Blood Money wasn't graphically impressive. In fact, it was also released for the PS2, and apart from a lower resolution, it was basically the same game. However, there's no denying that Hitman offers something that you can't find anywhere else. You're encouraged to experiment because there's more than one way to accomplish goals. The controls are not conventional though, and it will take a while to master all the techniques.
In the heart of battle.
I'll show you just how strong I am!
Super Street Fighter 4 was just supposed to be a DLC for regular Street Fighter 4, but when it was deemed too big, Capcom decided to release it as a standalone game. It includes 10 new fighters not present in the original, plus a few extra online modes. The game received several perfect scores as well. On RPCS3 there's little to complain about. Everything runs as it should, and when upscaled on capable hardware, the graphics look astounding.
Sacrificing herself to save her child.
And yet, thanks to her, the boy lives.
Of course.
Level 5 collaborated with Studio Ghibli to produce Ni-no Kuni's animated sequences. In fact, most of the art design was directed by Studio Ghibli, giving the game a distinct anime style. Very few titles can come as close as Ni-no Kuni to pull at the heartstrings of gamers, and it's as much a celebration of animation as it is video game design. On top of all that, Ni-no Kuni can be a challenging experience, even at normal difficulty, so don't let the cute graphics fool you. Following the release of Tomb Raider Legend, production of Underworld started in 2006, and it was developed in parallel with Anniversary. There were significant differences in level design between the 6th and 7th gen consoles, with the PlayStation 2 built with smaller levels and puzzle structures, for example. Still, Underworld had gorgeous graphics for its time, regardless of platform, and should be played if you're into action-adventure games.
But what do you know? I swing around long enough, and my new upgraded spider sense points me towards a fragment. Definitely sense.
In Shattered Dimensions, Madam Web calls on 4 versions of Spider-Man from 4 different realities to restore balance to the multiverse. Each version of Spider-Man looks and plays different, and the worlds they inhabit are just as unique. The game's story would later become the inspiration for the 2014 comic book storyline, Spider-Verse. And it would go on to become one of the most popular Spider-Man story arcs of all time.
My people are great warriors, but we cannot run forever.
Kai! I don't like these drones.
Heavenly Sword was an early title for the PS3 and was a hack-and-slash action game. It's not very long and will be completed in a few hours, but the lore is interesting, particularly the backstory of the Heavenly Sword, which was apparently made by an unknown heavenly deity. The game actually has 2 playable characters, although you'll mostly play as Noriko, who wields the Heavenly Sword. Sometimes you'll switch to Kai, who uses her crossbow to pick off enemies. Urban Trial Freestyle is a game where good timing and an element of luck is required to traverse obstacles successfully, and it was overseen by Julian Dupont, who is a Red Bull motorcycle athlete. Urban Trial was one of the most downloaded titles on the PlayStation Network, and for good reason. It's a lot of fun. For those of you who are interested, the game is also available on PC and iOS devices.
Back up! Back up!
They are calling to us. Can you hear them? It is beautiful.
Resistance 2 follows on where the first game left off, with Nathan Hale taken into custody. He ultimately ends up in San Francisco, where the level design and set pieces are even more impressive than in the first game. On RPCS3, the frame rate can sometimes dip into the low 20s, so be aware that it's meant to be played on high-end hardware. The game is fully playable, however, so if you have a decent rig, go ahead and enjoy this awesome first-person shooter. Before I go, here are 4 bonus games that didn't make my list of 25. They all fully playable, but I just didn't want to make my video longer than it already is. Anyway, thanks for watching, and maybe give a like if you approve of my work. A lot of effort goes into making these, so it will be much appreciated. Goodbye.